Second Timothy chapter 3. We're in the very last verse of what we have as chapter 3 of Paul's letter to Timothy. Sorry. Let's go back to 16. All scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. We talked about the purpose, the so that. We talked about servants of God and how all of us, not just the spiritual ninjas, all of us, not just your preacher, not just the elders, or everybody who has said yes to Jesus. When you said yes to Jesus, you submitted yourself to become a servant of God. Just one more thing about that. There were a variety of kinds of servants in Paul's day. And the kind of servant he's talking about here would have been a bond servant or a bond slave. Now, that you know this already, but a bond servant, a bond slave, was a slave not by force but by choice. They may have begun as a slave by force. They may have been purchased by a master. They may have been claimed as part of the bounty of or booty of war, which most of the slaves in the Roman world were the result of conquest. But a bondservant decided, I want to be your servant. I want to be your slave. This was a decision that they made. Nobody forced it upon them. I don't know that I can say, this is an idea I haven't yet pursued, but what was the life of a bondservant any better than the life of a slave? Maybe, but then again, here's the thing. If I'm going to be a servant of God, then this is not by force. It's by my decision. I am a servant of God because I chose this for myself. Now, there are a lot of people who they didn't know that when they said yes to Jesus. And part of it's going to sound like I'm throwing rocks. Maybe I am. That a lot of people, they just know, I'm getting my ticket punched to go to heaven, right? I'd say yes to Jesus. And I pray that prayer, and then when baptism Sunday rolls around, I get dunked, and I'm good. Now I just get to live with this subconscious awareness that when I die, I'm going to heaven. Okay, that's not all wrong, but one of the things that I regret as I see the church in the world is that we have extremes on this. One extreme I just described is pray the prayer. You're good. Don't worry about the rest of your life because God's grace covers it. Okay, but you gotta say yes to Jesus. Okay. The other one is, you got to say yes to Jesus, and then, buddy, you better dadgum well toe the line. Because it's God's grace that saves you, but you better work hard to stay saved. And neither one of those is the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Somewhere along about the middle is the idea that when I say yes to Jesus, I sign the deed for my life over to him. I become a servant of God. My life, my direction, my purposes now come into submission under His purpose, His will, His design. I can't continue to live gratifying all my personal desires, which even for altruistic people is a large part of why we do what we do before Jesus. But here's the other side. When I come to Jesus and say yes to His grace, I place my faith in Him and He saves me, not because of what I've done, but because of what He has done and continues to do. And then as a response to that grace, I grow in it. I think as Peter says, grow in the grace. And if I'm going to grow in the grace of Christ, the grace of God, as a servant of God, some things have to happen. I can't, it won't work to do what I've always done and get a different outcome. That's the definition of insanity. Okay, if I'm a servant of God, I've chosen that. And it makes me sad that there are a large number of people in churches all over the world, especially in our country, I think, who have a sense that they have a belief that they're covered. God's got this. Well, He does. And yes, you are covered. And because of that, now my response to God's grace is, and this is not, it involves my effort. It's not purely about my effort. It is a grace-infused, a grace-empowered response of living as a servant of God. If you're going to be like a bond slave, a bond servant, then whose desires will you be most active in trying to satisfy? Whose interests will you be most, working toward? You can't get rid of work. It's not, see, you're a bond servant, and your work is not what gave you that status. God's grace gave you that status. And because of that, we work. Okay. Here's the thing. We are given God-breathed scripture, which then makes us, he goes on, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. That is big. Thoroughly equipped. Well, okay, let's back up. There's two words, it'd be easy to just, buzz right by. May be thoroughly equipped. So there's a big difference. In this instance, quite a big difference between will be and may be. To that, the servant of God may be equipped, thoroughly equipped. That's not even, it's closer to can be thoroughly equipped. It's different than will be thoroughly equipped. And I think the difference comes in my volition, my will, my choice. God provides, He has made provision that I can be thoroughly equipped. Well, that's conditional? I believe so. I think that's what the wording indicates. That so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped. So what's the condition? That I choose to be, that I submit to his design, his discipline, what I know. And by the way, God's will often feels mysterious to us, but he's declared in dozens of places in the New Testament what his will is. If it would be a smart thing for every Christian who's got a computer to get online and do a Bible word search for the will of God or God's will. You might be surprised what you find. It's not this veiled, hidden. It's pretty clear. All right. If I have made the decision to pursue him, his will, his ways, his design, I think that's the condition for me being thoroughly equipped. It's not like God, well, he flips a switch and bing, now you got everything you need. I don't think so. Oh, on one side of that, yeah. Peter writes, his divine power has given us everything we need for life and godliness. So, yeah, I mean, it's already available. But there's a difference between this being thoroughly equipped, available, and actually being thoroughly equipped. All right, I beat that into the ground, but I want to put myself in a position where I can access this thorough equipping. And it's not about, well, when I get dedicated enough or when I get good enough. It's not about that. It is still all about God's grace. But don't you see, well, that's not an accusation. I think we have to see that God's grace makes this thorough equipping possible for every believer who, upon saying yes to Jesus, becomes a servant of God. But the condition is, well, we have to respond to his grace. Okay, thoroughly equipped. That's a really big idea. You remember when you took your first adult job? I don't know about you. My first adult job was youth ministry. And I was full of spit and vinegar, and I loved what I was doing. I could play guitar. I could roller skate. Kids seemed to like me. I would show up and mainly keep my commitments. But I was not thoroughly equipped. I was equipped, but not thoroughly so. Yeah, I think this idea of being thoroughly equipped, to me, suggests a process. I think of teachers, my observation from the outside and talking with my daughter and son-in-law who are teachers. You have your student teaching experience where you're in the classroom, you're being guided by a teacher who is more experienced, and ideally a teacher who has a deep experience so that they can coach and mentor you. And then you get your degree, you get a position, and you begin teaching. Do you feel thoroughly equipped? I don't think so. I think you feel equipped, right? I've got enough. But it's not like, oh, I got everything I need. Okay, time's up. Got to come back next time. I'll see you then on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.